So welcome everyone to the panel that we titled Data Stewardship and Responsible Data Science, Lessons from the Data Steward Instructor Training. And the reason that we wanted to present this panel at this conference is that we feel it addresses a slightly under-discussed area of data science in general. This conference is doing a great job in highlighting some of the ethical concerns that come out of this rising data centricity in research. We're seeing data-intensive research becoming the go-to for research. We're seeing an increasing global collaboration around data sharing, and we're seeing changes in the way data are being produced and made open and being reused. This, of course, while has a lot of potential, also has a lot of problems, and particularly to do with the managing and long-term curation of data. We're seeing rapidly evolving data infrastructures that are underpinning this trend towards data intensive science. But we're also seeing a high turnover of researchers, and this really leads us to start questioning who is actually in place to be scrutinizing these infrastructures, implementing these infrastructures, implementing the policy and legislation that drives and controls these infrastructures, and who provides the long-term institutional expertise and memory to be able to control data, data sets, data collections within institutions who are engaged in data-intensive science. What we're also seeing at the same time, and I think Mark Parsons touched on it yesterday, was an increased prominence in thinking about openness in data, so the open data movement, but also fair data, so the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data. And understanding and implementing those commitments towards openness and fairness in data requires a considerable and unique skill set that sometimes is under-recognized within institutions. So what we really feel within this group, and I think more broadly, is that there is a critical need for skilled individuals to manage, curate, and integrate data sets and collections within institutions, but also to provide the short and long-term oversight of data, oversight not only of data within institutions, but also how data moves between institutions and is reused and recombined. And that leads us to discussions about data stewardship and the role that data stewards can play in safeguarding responsible data science. So that was a very brief overview of why we feel this is an important panel, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by a number of my colleagues from the CODATA-RDA FAIRsFAIR Data Steward Instructor Training. I'm going to briefly introduce each of them, and then we're going to go forward with a more open discussion. We've left time at the end for questions, so we do hope there will be some questions or comments on data stewardship in general, data stewardship in Africa, and also the curriculum that we're teaching. So without further ado, and maybe the speakers can turn on their videos so that we can see who they are. The first person we have on the panel is Hugh Shanahan. Hugh's got a background in computational biology, focusing on transcriptomics and metagenomics, combined with a deep background in computational and theoretical physics. He completed his PhD in 1994 in lattice QCD and completed postdocs at Glasgow, Cambridge, and Tsukuba before moving into bioinformatics. He's currently a professor of open science in the computer science department at Royal Holloway, University of London. Secondly, we have Venkat, who only requires one name. Venkat was originally a biologist. He moved from biochemistry to developmental biology and then biomedical imaging. In the latter, he was involved in model organism repository that practiced open research, and it was with this expertise that he moved formally into the field of research data management, open research, and FAIR principles. He first worked for the Digital Curation Center as a lead trainer and is also a co-chair of the CODATA-RDA Data Science Summer Schools. He recently moved from the DCC to become a training officer at OpenAir. Thirdly, we've got Joy Davidson. Joy is a coordinator for the UK's Digital Curation Centre, which is a research infrastructure that specialises in data management planning, curation, and open science. Joy currently leads work on policies and practices for the European Commission-funded FAIRsFAIR project, which aims to increase the production and use of FAIR data. She's been involved in reviews for European strategy forums on research infrastructures, roadmap updates, and the Horizon 2020 research infrastructure funding programs. So fourth, we have Naniki Maphakwane. She is the Director for Library and Information Services at Botswana Open University and the Chairperson of Botswana Library Consortium, as well as a member for the Botswana Open Data Open Science Committee. At her institution, her tasks include leading a team of librarians to support researchers to effectively utilize research tools, research impact, and bibliometrics, as well as research data management. At the BLC, she oversees the running of the consortium that has over 60 member institutions. And she's a strong advocate for open access and has embarked on a number of advocacy and training activities for consortium members. And she helps negotiate for favorable subscription costs of databases and other proprietary ICT platforms that the member consortium wish to subscribe to. And she coordinates and organizes trainings, workshops, conferences to support local librarians to gain skills in emerging library and the emerging library landscape and research trends. And Naniki was the local organizer for our first ever African Data Steward training event that was held earlier in the year. And finally, we've got Sanjin Muftic. He is a Bosnian-born Canadian digital scholar and film editor based at UCT. He has staged heightened theatrical text and intermedial performances, designed videography, and edited for various South African theatre productions and films. Sanjin has completed his drama PhD at UCT, focusing on planetary bricolage and theatrical images. He's currently working for UCT Libraries as a digital scholarship specialist, where he serves as a data steward and digital curator. His tasks include developing advocacy towards practicing research data management and helping researchers manage and showcase their digital scholarship projects and their collections through Omeka-S. Sanjin was also the alumni of our first ever Data Steward Summer School. So he's got a lot of insight, both as a trainer, but also as a recipient of our training, and definitely has some interesting insights to contribute. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the panel to have a bit of discussion about data stewardship in general and how we've come to develop the curriculum we have within the CODATA-RDA FAIRsFAIR Summer Schools. And the first question is directed at Venkat. Venkat, what is a data steward? And I think a lot of people on the call will be quite interested to hear. And why are they important to responsible data-driven research?
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you for the invitation to join this discussion, and everyone here. Pleasure to be here. So, yes, the question of what is a data steward? So the idea of data stewardship is a relatively recent thing that, and especially if you're talking about an individual that's doing data stewardship, that's certainly quite new. And these diagrams, which I hope you can see, are trying to encapsulate what this is. They're both actually from Dutch organizations, these diagrams, and you can see the links to these documents at the bottom there. And the reason, actually, one of the reasons why they're both from Dutch organizations or projects, well, actually, the Netherlands is probably leading in the world towards data stewardship compared to anywhere else. And so they've done a lot of work regarding this. And hopefully what you can see here is that data stewardship bridges the gap between several different realms, whether it be the actual researchers themselves, or perhaps the policy that underpins where the researcher is funded or driven, any kind of guidelines and mandates, or indeed the infrastructure that is required to support all these activities, with the storage spaces, the compute power, things like that. So let's perhaps focus on the, I just realized that I'm moving my cursor about, but it's not my screen that I'm sharing. It's Louise's. But on the right-hand diagram, you'll be able to see that there's a nice illustration of this overlap happening. And in the very center, I hope you can see that FAIR is spelled out, and that is actually the FAIR principles, which I'm not sure how much this has been covered in the rest of the conference, but in case you don't know it, so it's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these FAIR principles have existed just for the last 5 years or so, and they form the basis of what we could say is research data management best practices. And data stewards, we're hoping, can actually enforce these best practices. And as I say, they are at the interface between these different domains. And indeed, up until very recently, data stewards are very informal in nature. They tended to be individuals who perhaps were researchers first and foremost, but they've been asked to do data stewardship activities as well. Or perhaps they're more involved in policy or something, but still they've been sidelined into doing data stewardship. But of course, data stewardship in itself is a very time-consuming thing. It's a very technical and it needs a lot of knowledge to be able to do this. And so in recent times, there has been a push towards trying to professionalize what data stewards do, to actually make them full-time employed people. And that is where our data stewardship school kind of comes into play as well. We developed a curriculum which hopefully will allow a more formalized data stewardship professionalization to occur. And hopefully we'll be discussing this later, and especially in the context of how this could play in Africa as well. So I hope that sort of sets the stage for what we'll be talking about later. But of course, my fellow panelists are also going to introduce their answers to a few other questions.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Venkat. So, I mean, just following on from what you have been saying, at the moment, data stewardship is only recently being recognized as a formal role within institutions. And currently, data stewards can be located in a number of different areas within those institutions, sometimes sitting in libraries, sometimes sitting within disciplines as researchers, sometimes being more policy oriented. So there's quite a lot of variability at the moment as well, wouldn't you say?
Yes, sorry, I didn't realize you were about to ask me a question. Yes, I would agree that there is a lot of variability, and it's this idea that it's a sort of mongrel role that previously didn't exist, and now we're trying to define this. Yes, and of course to actually give credit to these people as well, which is very key, because previously because they were doing it on a part-time basis, they were not getting the proper credit for it, even though it is a very time-consuming and very demanding job. And so this, what we're trying to describe through the data stewardship schools and elsewhere, we're trying to give them the due credit there. Absolutely.
That's great. Thanks, Venkat. So that moves us very conveniently onto the next question that I was going to ask. Obviously, because we are trying to still define roles of data stewards and educate a highly heterogeneous population, I was going to ask Joy, Naniki, and Sanjin what they think the challenges are of educating and embedding data stewards in research environments. I don't know, Joy, if you want to give a more general response, and then Naniki and Sanjin, if you want to reflect on that in the African context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the previous diagrams that you saw showing exactly what a data steward is, hopefully give you the sense that we really don't know. It can be any number of different things. And as Louise pointed out, it could be a very technical role where you're working very much hands-on with researchers to do technical things. It could be something much more high level at a policy role, and you're helping to define and interpret policies for researchers at the organization. Or you might be something more generic, and that might be providing high-level guidance and support to support research data management and the production of FAIR data. So I think the very fact that, as Venkat said, it's a new field, it's emerging, coupled with the fact that it is quite a broad range of skill sets, and it's not exactly one role, but it's many different flavors of the same role. All of these have a real sort of implication on the development of formal training and education. I think as we firm up the professionalization of these career paths and possibly look at some of these different roles as specialisms, rather than just calling them different kind of activities, I think they are very much in their own right specialist roles, and they need to be recognized as such. I think then we'll start to see the formal curriculum start to filter through. At the moment, what we're doing is more of the kind of training-based activity. And I think I just wanted to point out, there's a couple of slides here that you can see. These are polls that we run through the FAIRsFAIR Data Stewardship training course. These are targeted at the national level. We've run about 3 or 4 so far, and you'll hear a little bit more about these from Hugh later. But what we do generally ask when we have the data stewards come on board is to try and get a sense of how long they've been in their role. So I think it's important to remember that it's an emerging field. There's no real set description of skill sets associated with any of the data stewardship roles. But also what we're seeing is that most of the people coming to the courses are very new in their roles. They've just come in within the last 6 months. Quite often, a lot of them are just looking for the basics. Just give me enough information so that I can talk to the researchers that I need to support in an informed way and point them to the resources that they need to be aware of. So a lot of what we've tried to do in our training with the FAIRsFAIR Data Stewardship Program is to give them that sort of initial foundation to move on and build as they go through their course of their careers. So we've come up with kind of 3 thematic areas. And again, I think Hugh will pick up on this, but it's more to look at how to deliver training, which is a key role that data stewards have to play, how to support data management planning, which is also a key activity, and how to start to think about consolidating research data services at their organization and how they can play a pivotal role in developing these and taking it forward. I think it's important to note, Venkat mentioned that the Netherlands is very much a global leader in this respect. And I think that's true. I think they certainly are doing lots of really great things and embedding data stewards in some cases at the faculty level. So they've got domain specific knowledge. I think it's worth making clear though that the reason they are able to do this is they're getting funding from their government to support some seed funding to make sure that these roles can be embedded. Unfortunately, we don't see that level of support coming through in most other countries. So I think that, again, is another challenge that is hindering the embedding of data stewards. We need to make sure that there is recognition for the need for these kinds of roles at the organizational level, and we need to make sure that we're getting the funding to bring them in and to be able to bring these skills that are sorely needed into the mix. So I'll stop there and I'll hand over to the other panelists and see how they feel and what challenges they've come up with.
Brilliant, thanks, Joy. Naniki, maybe you want to pick up on that about educating data stewards. What is your experience for educating data stewards in Botswana?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Louise. Our experience here is that really the ground is not yet ready for conversation and implementation of data stewardship for both librarians and researchers. After our workshop that was hosted by CODATA, there's not been much motivation because of lack of understanding in this area. So as librarians trying to support the area, it is a long walk towards, trying to support a market or rather researchers that are not very conversant with the area. There is a lot that needs to be done to fill up this skills gap so that everybody understands what has to be done and what are the advantages and what are the opportunities that are embedded in the data stewardship. We are very grateful for CODATA to have given us the opportunity to learn, but we still have a long way to go, especially here in Botswana. Thank you.
That's very interesting. So even starting the conversation about what a data steward is, before you start thinking about educating and implementing. Sanjin, I don't know if you want to reflect on that. UCT, I think, is quite advanced in terms of data stewardship and data management on the, at least in South Africa and on the African continent. What's your experience about aligning data stewardship with emerging data infrastructures?
Thanks, Louise, and thanks for having me. That's a heavy question. Yeah, I think in some way we are quite, I guess, privileged at UCT with the resources that we have to be able to run that. And I guess in a way, if I look at the team that I work with, which is called Digital Library Services, I feel like we all do data stewardship roles really across the spectrum, because we will maybe think a little bit about what a policy should be without having the power to do it, but also help people set up a data management plan and also like curate data for people. So I think we all go through all of that. But I think it is still a challenge in terms of setting it up, and maybe that's not infrastructure. But for me, it still feels like we have a lot of researchers who approach us and recognize that they need someone to help them deal with the data questions around their research project, especially if they want to get funding. But while it's weird, while a DMP has become almost a requirement for a lot of projects, the position or role of having somebody as data steward, I really haven't seen, you know, where it is almost like mandated, like who is the data steward for this? So to actually have people, I don't know, almost listed, what do they call, like a line item, like here's how much a data steward will do or bring towards this project. But yeah, look, I think from our side, there is also, it feels like no matter how much our department does, we are always under pressure, I feel, to grow the data steward community and to kind of, I don't want to say seduce is the wrong word, but somehow win people over to the data steward side and say, oh, look, you're a data steward. And they're like, what is that? Like, no, you're just a person in your field who's interested in data. So you must, you know, you must join us, and like, we can talk data, we can share skills with you, and then you can spread it to somebody else. And I think especially even with the libraries, sometimes, you know, we are seen as those are the people in the libraries who deal with data, and that you ask them that question. When in a sense, one way to look at it is, in the future, should all people who work in the libraries be also empowered with the skill set of being data stewards, the way I guess that things are going. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the infrastructure question, but it's kind of my initial kind of things to the challenges around setting it up at UCT.
I think it's very important. I mean, and I think we see a progression, you know, that in some institutions, the role of data stewards is not recognized at all. In some institutions, it's recognized but underfunded. And in other institutions, even if it is funded, it's quite a new role, and small teams mean that it can be very isolating and very challenging for individuals taking on that role. And that leads us nicely on to the next issue, which we were going to talk about, which is the way we've approached training data stewards to try and empower individuals who are perhaps already in these roles, but in a less formal capacity, to give them some of the tools necessary to be able to go forward and feel a bit more confident about what they're doing. So I'm going to hand over to Hugh. Hugh, if you want to talk us through how training is run at the CODATA-RDA FAIRsFAIR Data Steward Schools.
Okay, thanks very much, Louise. Yeah, so what you're seeing here is this graphic is an explanation of that curriculum, the way we run that particular training. The thing to stress here is that this is something which has evolved over nearly 3 years now of work. So we can see substantial changes from when Sanjin was involved to Botswana to where we are now, which I think is a pretty tight and good, it's a tight set, if I use the jazz motif for a moment. So let me just go through these. So we see these different slightly colored boxes, which represent the different days that things are being thought on. So in the top row, what we're doing is first of all, there's just an introduction to what does data stewardship mean and what do we mean by open science and so on, sort of setting the framework there. Then there's a discussion of something called the FAIR-AWARE tool, which is in some respect an explicit discussion of fairness. So what that is, FAIR-AWARE itself is an online tool to raise awareness and educate on data fairness. So that's a good sort of jumping off point for getting people to think about FAIR. We spent about half of that day working on pedagogy. So we don't try and revamp pedagogical theory, but it's enough to remind people about, okay, this is some of the things you should be thinking about in terms of teaching, because data stewards or people who do the role of a data steward but just aren't called that spend a great deal of their time communicating with people and explaining what they're doing. So Sanjin, I think, was sort of saying, hang on, I spend a lot of time trying to persuade people why you're doing what you're doing. So the pedagogy element reminds people of things like, okay, building lesson plans and so on. On the second day, there is a seminar on responsible and open research. And that really sort of is a clear strand in terms of everything that's being discussed here. It's not just about DMPs. You've got to remind your researchers to behave in a responsible fashion. We follow that then with a section on data management plans, DMPs, because everybody, as Joy was pointing out, everybody's jumping up and down and saying, people need to help us. They need help on writing their DMPs. And then on the third day, we have a discussion on service models for RDM, which is effectively doing an assessment of the services you do in research data management at an institution, and to say, okay, what's working, what do you want to build on, and sort of work on your next goals. Louise, if I could move on just to the next slide, please, if that's okay. So this is all run on an online basis now. It runs over 3 days, and we do that on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It has a strong emphasis on team-based exercises. So people are not just sort of sitting on their own in these things. We have breakout rooms, and there's discussions and exercises and so on. Plus, we give homework at the end of the Monday and the Wednesday to prep for the following day. The other final point is to note is that this is typically run on a regional or national basis, because if you remember with the slide that Joy showed, and indeed what's been pointed out, that Louise has also pointed out, that the people who are sitting in that role are very new and often in very small teams. But what you can do is what we see, at least in Europe, is that many people are being employed in, individuals being employed in many different higher education institutions. So this is an opportunity to say to those people, wait a minute, you might be new, but likewise there's somebody who's just down the road from you who's in a similar state, and you folks should actually be talking to each other. There are some links to an example program that I've included here, which hopefully we can share with people if you want to kind of see a detailed breakdown on how one of those sessions run. Okay, that was all I kind of wanted to cover there, Louise, if that's okay.
That's great. And I think you do raise I think one of the most important points of the schools is to create a network of data stewards who can exchange knowledge, exchange contextual challenges, and start upskilling each other. I think, it can be very lonely starting in a new role when there's no one else in your institution who occupies the same role. So hopefully it's not only about giving the skills and the vocabulary necessary to take forward discussions about data steward within your institution, but to create a network where you can start snowballing a data steward community within your own institution, your own country. And that's great. And that actually leads me on to the next question. As you will have seen from the program that Hugh presented, what we do in the data steward training is a combination of technical skills and ethics and policy skills. And I wanted to put this question to Joy as to why focus on both practical skills as well as ethics and policy. I think sometimes when people think of data stewardship, it's just about checking a DMP and making sure that the repository is working. Why are we having this combination of ethics and policy as well as practical skills?
Yeah, I think, well, going back to the first slide with the very detailed kind of images of what a data steward is, you can see it crosses lots of boundaries and lots of different skill sets are needed. I think if you are in any role as a data steward, it's good for you to have the practical skills so you can do the day-to-day job in delivering training, in helping people write DMPs and to review those DMPs, and also to help, with the more political side of your job. And that would be, I think, to start to consolidate what is happening in terms of research support at your institution. I think what is important to remember is that data stewardship, and I think Sanjin mentioned this, is not really any single person's job. It's the result of lots of different parts of the institution doing different parts of the puzzle. So the diagram you can see on the slide here shows that there are, various different organizational units that might have to be involved. It could be the IT department to help manage the data during the active stage. It could be people at the library to help you think about standards and various things to do with interoperability and data repositories. But one of the key things we also drive home is the fact that ethics and people who work in that sort of field have a huge role to play in determining what data can and can't be shared. I think the whole point of research data management is to be a good researcher, to have the ability to stand up to scrutiny if people ask questions about your research. But also with this notion that you want to be able to share the data. You want it to be used and picked up by others. And it could be used by you again in the future as the reuser. It's not always somebody else. But determining what you can share and at what point in the life cycle and in what way, I think revolves around a lot of decision-making processes that are not always considered when you get to that point of thinking about research. So I think getting the ethics team involved and engaged and understanding that the mindset is shifting from protecting data and locking it down and destroying it as soon as the project's over to this kind of longer term view of having a body of research data that is fair and can be picked up and reused. It needs that kind of liaison point. So the data steward does need to understand the ethics processes and the drivers that are kind of governing this field, general data protection, regulations, things like this. There's lots of things we have to be aware of in terms of protecting access to data. So we need to understand what is feasible. How can we unlock as much of the data as possible while still respecting these sorts of data protection issues. So I think getting the ethics teams and having that understanding of why this is important and how to negotiate what can be a very tricky balance between open and closed. I think data stewards need to have that kind of bigger picture view. And that means that they need to have this bigger picture of not just what organizational units operate at the institution, but also the workflows. And also, so at what stage does somebody in a research application grant process go and talk to the ethics teams. If they go too late, it might be difficult to get the openness built into the project. So there's a need to understand what's there, the different kinds of workflows and the timings, and also the external drivers like legislations and funder requirements. So I think there's this real need to understand both the practical day-to-day activities, but also the bigger picture. And that's why we try in this FAIRsFAIR Data Stewardship School to give people a little flavor of all three of those things. So pedagogy, data management planning, and responsible research, and then that picture about how to start to join things up at the institution.
Thanks for that. And I think you raise a really interesting point, and something that as an ethicist I find incredibly exciting about the data steward role is that it really shifts the focus in ethics from responsible research projects to responsible research institutions, and thinking about how ethics translates and permutates after the termination of a specific project, and how data stewards are involved in curating the data after the individual researcher has left, and thinking about how institutions can curate data resources in the long term. And I think it's definitely a new area of ethics that is very exciting and very interesting to start thinking about. And because I find it so interesting and exciting, it definitely does move me on to the next question, which is, how is this going to look in Africa in the future? Obviously, we've got a huge amount of research going on in the continent. We've got an increasing amount of data being produced by our own institutions. We're getting data returned to Africa from collaborations. We're getting governments thinking about opening up data sets. So what is the potential for data stewardship in Africa? And how do we foster responsible data science through targeting data stewards and upskilling data stewards? And I wanted to open this up to, well, the entire panel, but particularly Naniki and Sanjin, if they have any reflections on what the potential is, where we need to join up the dots at the moment, and what it might look like in the future. So Sanjin, I don't know if you want to start with that.
Sure. Look, I think there is a huge amount of a need and a potential for it. And I think data stewardship, it also kind of linked to, I guess, in a way, it's kind of like an advanced form of what I would call IT literacy, because especially in an academic field, because it's learning how a lot of those things around sharing and publishing and the ethics of data and all of that is really, really interconnected. And on top of looking for funding and maybe trying to identify those roles and setting up programs that are dedicated to it, I think having more infrastructure on the continent would also help. Because for me, it still feels like there's a little bit of not a threat, but a little bit of perception that this kind of data stewardship is meant to help take data out of the continent for the benefit of others and not for the benefit of the continent. So it still somehow seems as a little bit of an outsider coming in and saying, look, this is how you should organize your house, and then we'll take it. And without it actually sitting with infrastructure on the continent to show, like, you know, the data is staying here and there are limitations to it, or it is for the rest of it. I think that's a particular challenge to sometimes convince researchers about, and also to just kind of paint the picture a bit more. I know it's global, but kind of like an equal global in a way. So I think that's one challenge that comes up. Yeah.
I think it's a really excellent point. You know, without data policies and data infrastructures on the continent, it is very difficult to see how we develop an African perspective on data stewardship, or an African flavor of data stewardship, and that there is a lot that needs to be done to join up between these different areas of investment. And Naniki, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that about fostering and growing data stewardship on the continent.
I think generally this is a very raw, it's a raw market here in Botswana, and there's a lot of potential. And I think with more efforts, there's enthusiasm that I can see. But the The problem is that there are no policy frameworks, and at national level, even at institutional level. And we need to engage all the stakeholders, especially the ministries and governments that oversee the area of research and development, so that we can have a good takeoff. Because without policies, without frameworks, without guidance, then our efforts as potential data stewards will be with no rewards. So I think conversations must be, enacted amongst all the stakeholders, government, institute of research, researchers, universities, concerning data stewardship. I think with that, we can have a takeoff that is positive. Thank you.
I think that's a really excellent point, that we need to get all the stakeholders at the table to get policies that really do guide investment. I think at the moment on the continent, we're at a very critical stage in that there's a lot of enthusiasm and hype around the fourth industrial revolution. But if we don't get the data stewardship, the data curation, the data storage correct, we are potentially opening ourselves up to more problems rather than more solutions and innovations. I just wanted to throw that out to Hugh, Venkat, and Hugh as data steward educators. If you had any thoughts about data stewardship in Africa, all of you have taught at Naniki school. If there was anything you wanted to say.
If it's okay, I'll kick off first, which is, so the point that Sanjin has made about the perception of this being something that's again being imposed on Africans. I think I would retort that the danger is that in a few years' time, again, we'll have a situation where North American and European institutions can say, well, don't worry, we have lots of trained up data stewards who will take care of your data. And then, yet again, the data ends up sitting on servers in various points outside of Africa. While the opportunity is actually having people with data stewardship skills in Africa, then actually the response is, hold on, no, don't worry, we can take good care of our own data, and we can deal with it in a long term. It's a way of protecting that flight, I think, is an important point to note. The other thing is also to know that there's not much difference here in terms of, at the one end of the spectrum, we probably have the Netherlands, which is where you have people who are there for maybe a few years in position doing this role. Most other European countries, it's, as you saw from the plots from Joy, it's less than a year that somebody is there, and they're usually very, very isolated. So everybody is learning here. So African research should not think that somehow they're behind the curve on this. You're not, because everybody's got a long way to go up that curve. The other thing, finally, I would say is that, well, the pandemic did one thing, which was it kind of pushed us into thinking about delivering things on an online basis. And now we have, so for example, the curriculum that we talked about there, that's being transferred over to a virtual learning environment that will be hosted by EOSC Synergy in the future. And what you're now seeing is the next generation of projects to put things onto virtual learning environments up and do a much better and thorough job there. So you will see a much better array of training materials and that people can make use of going forward. Anyway, and I'd be interested to hear what Joy and Venkat might have to say on this.
So that's great. So you're saying we're not behind, but now is the time to act.
Yeah.
Joy, I can see you nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think this perception that you're behind is completely wrong. I know from the DCC's own kind of practical experience, we've been working with quite a few organizations in South Africa over the years, and UCT was one of them. And every time we went to South Africa, we were blown away by just how proactive all of the organizations we were meeting with were. They were setting things up in the absence of having any mandates from funding bodies or other external drivers. Whereas when we were working in the UK and in Europe, we found that it was very hard to get things moving, even though people knew they had to do it and there was a driver, from the funders to do something. So we were very blown away by that, and the speed of progress in Africa has been, very inspirational as well. I think you're not behind, and you'll probably soon be overtaking some of what we're doing elsewhere. I think the other point to make clear is, Sanjin mentioned the problem of all of the research data that is created in the continent ends up going somewhere else. And I think I would echo what both Hugh and Sanjin were saying, is that, while data management plans are essentially a plan to share, they are also really good tools to protect against this kind of thing happening. So I think the earlier you start to think about what will happen to your data, the better likelihood you will avoid those scenarios where you have lost control of your data and it's gone off to some European server. I think, as you said too, Louise, there's a need to start to build up more data repository platforms and to have places to store the data. And I think as we start to see all of these things coming and getting embedded, and that awareness and the ability to control what happens to your data and taking more of that proactive roles through these data stewardship roles to help support that, I think that will certainly hopefully avoid that scenario happening in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Venkat, any last comments?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add anything new to what was just said. I wholeheartedly agree with what was being said. But I would say that instead of looking at the continent perhaps being behind on what's going on, I would think of it as an opportunity that you're starting from scratch and that things would be easier to accomplish then. Looking at the landscape in a place like Europe and North America, I think they're actually hindered by having to almost retrofit these new policies and ways of thinking, and there's so much bureaucracy, etc., that actually just makes things worse and slows everything down. Whereas, I'm maybe generalizing a little too far. Of course, some parts of Africa are like South Africa are ahead of the curve, perhaps, but generally speaking, I'm thinking that you have less of these hindrances, and you should think of that as an opportunity.
I do agree with that. I think the agility of building infrastructures from scratch and learning from experiences from other countries is actually a valuable tool that we need to embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. And to address this notion that fear of thinking that anything created within Africa might be stolen or something. And of course, there's a lot of historical context there that needs to be put into consideration too. And this is where the trust building exercise is needed. And this is where data stewards really could be a very important piece of the puzzle. That if we want to create this network and have a train the trainer system, the more local African individuals who can actually establish themselves as a data steward and propagate their knowledge through networks within on the ground at the grassroots level throughout Africa, the better, and hopefully some kind of trust will be built up. And we're at the start, and it is a culture change, which a phrase that I frequently use. We're trying to instigate a culture change, and we're in the process of doing that. And yeah, it's probably a long, far time away from now, but we're in that process, and we need to push things forward.
Absolutely, and I agree. I think there is a lot of there's a strong historical legacy for concerns about data theft, data misuse from African data. But something that I always use as a counterexample when it gets raised when I'm teaching is that the more visible the data, and if data are assigned a digital object identifier, the more easy it is to track. So it's more easy to point out if it's being misused or if it's been stolen by someone else. If it's kept in a box somewhere and someone steals a memory stick, it's much more difficult to prove that you owned it in the first place. So I think that's another role that data stewards can have, is to really positively change this quite a negative attitude towards openness and data sharing that comes with some of the historical legacies of research in Africa. So I think that's also a very exciting discussion, ethics discussion, that involves data stewardship. I'm very conscious of the time, and I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I wanted to thank all the panelists very much for sharing your expertise. Please do have a look at our school networks. I put the website, the Twitter handle, and an email address if anyone wanted to contact us, and to raise awareness that we are always open for discussions about new schools, and we're also very open for people to reuse our school materials. It's all open. So please do, if you are interested in data steward training, do get in contact with us, and we're very happy to have a chat about the possibilities. But I think, because we have another 7 minutes, if there are any questions for the panelists, and now would be the time to ask them. I'll leave my screen sharing so everyone can get the details.
Louise, there's a question in the chat, in fact.
Great. So it's from Turgay. What does the panel think about the lifetime of data from ethics perspective? Can obsolete data be a risk to contemporary ethics? Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
Okay, I'll have a go, and then I can be happily contradicted by people who know things, actually know the things. So Turgay, I think that's a really good question. I would say that the first, that kind of comes down to that thing about building data management plans and thinking about, a data management plan can explicitly think about the lifetime of a data set and who is it going to be shared with, for example. So for example, and again, apologies for quoting something in a European context, but something that, a phrase that kind of crops up in European Union speak is that data should be open by default, closed when necessary. In other words, there's nothing to stop people from saying particular data sets should be closed, that for privacy reasons, for a whole host of excellent good reasons, data sets should not be generally and publicly available. What it is about is saying, okay, if you're doing that, you need to explain that. You need to work that through. Okay, and for example, if you're saying data destruction is something that should be done, then yes, I think that would be also reasonable. But again, it's simply justifying why it is that one makes those decisions.
Super.
Yeah, I was trying to interpret the question, and so I'm thinking that of course whether there's a funder or an institutional mandate, depending on how long data should be preserved before it might be destroyed. You certainly, from an ethical point of view, you need to consider that. Of course, it's more than just ethics there. But of course, it depends on what kind of data we're talking about. If it has real merit that could be of use a lot further down the line beyond the amount of time that a funder mandate might say, then there isn't a moral, perhaps, obligation to keep that. And so it does need to be done on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not sure you can provide any kind of blanket coverage here. And this is where you do have ethical advisory boards, for example, who might actually look into these, as well as how this data might be accessed too, of course. But yeah, I don't know if you can
I think for
provide,
me,
yeah.
Sorry, Venka. I think for me, it speaks to the critical importance of effective data curation and effective metadata. It's very difficult to have discussions like this when you're not entirely sure how the data was generated, or the data is not particularly well curated. So you get data dumps and they just sit there and potentially are not used particularly effectively. And I think with data stewardship, linking into data curation and obviously data management plans, really emphasizing effective metadata, it helps having these discussions about obsolete data because you can actually start from a very detailed understanding of what the data are, how it was generated, if it is worth preserving, and so forth.
Yeah, I think I would, just to chip in, I think the point you make about the metadata records is a really good one, because even if the data no longer exists or it has been deleted because it was in line with retention periods or legislation or for whatever reason, I think we still want to know that somebody had collected the data and that we wanted to know that they had done some analysis and there was research related to this. So I think it's important to remember that even if the data itself no longer exists, we probably still want the metadata record that provides the context on why it was collected, what was done with it, and the fact that it has been deleted in line with legislation or similar. So.
Absolutely. Sanjin, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add maybe from a different point of view, because I guess I looked at the question, was thinking more about data that might have been collected over 50, 100 years ago. And now with the digitization and the open access process is being put online. And a lot of that stuff is not right in terms of either how it was collected or how it's being described. But it could be argued that it contains some useful things that need reinterpretation or need to be shared for that. So just from working on a couple of projects where, digital collections are being put up of certain things that were collected in the country a long time ago, how do you provide enough in the context so that somebody who, and I guess metadata is a part of that, obviously, so that somebody does not get the wrong picture around what it is that we are currently sharing. And that also, I think it's not, I mean, that's up to a research project, that it's not just about putting what was there before, but then like allowing it to now be reinterrogated as well. And maybe that's beyond what a data steward is, but I think it's something that they must bring to research projects and their discussion around that.
Absolutely. Understanding the potential for ethical harms to arise out of data sharing, I think is a really important point of data stewards. They have the overview of the data sets being held in their institutional repositories and an overview of the projects that are applying to gain access to them. So I think they do play an incredibly pivotal point in ensuring that all research arising from data reuse are beneficial. I see we're a little bit over time. If there are any other questions, it would be the time to ask them. But if there aren't, or you're still processing what is a data steward, and want to ask questions later, as I said, please do get in touch with us. We all love talking about data stewardship, and the panel is incredibly knowledgeable about all areas of data stewardship and data steward training. And to echo Joy, thank you so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed the panel, and we will look forward to the rest of the conference.